All right, so section is on farming. So let's just start out with the big question that all of us want to know, which is why did you buy the farm and what motivated you to get into farming?
Well, to be my own boss is a high value throughout my life. Was never good at taking orders. And I was a live-in hired man, Emel's favorite guy because I got up better than most of the other kids. Refused to get up at 5:30 to go milk cows and do the chores. So I became attached to, I guess, taking care of animals was for me a rather joyful experience to satisfy these hungry mouths. So I grew up loving farming, even though it was a fairly tough life.
Mm-hmm. And just so we've got it on tape, you grew up on a farm in North Dakota that was a century farm, right?
Right. My grandfather homesteaded it in 1883, and my dad ended up on the farm, and he never owned it. It was a Lange Farm Corporation, and so his he had 8 siblings who met annually when I was real small, and they, during the Depression, 1930s, they still wondered why the farm didn't make any money. And of course, that was embarrassing. My older brothers hated those meetings.
But eventually that farm grew to, is it over 1,000 acres now, isn't it?
Yes, my grandfather accumulated land of people who gave up on homesteading. And he persisted during the tough years and ended up not only owning the home farm, but I think he ended up, the oldest daughter homesteaded, and I think they ended up owning more land west of Webster that Aunt Teresa ended up owning that.
So you wanted to be your own boss, you liked farming, but you left the farm and went and got your education, and eventually, as we know from other sessions, you landed in as a professor at Dakota State in Madison. So you started working, you had the kids. What made you decide to buy the farm?
The college job was sometimes very disgusting, disappointing, and I could see changes coming where history would be phased out, and so I thought we need some kind of an alternative plan. And at the time, in 1973, the neighbor's farm, Warner Boyd's farm, was up for sale, and it was going to be auctioned off in lots. And I went to the real estate agent and made a deal with a contract for deed. I was able to scrape up enough to get a down payment and buy the entire farm of 480 acres.
And so you acquired this farm. How much of the farm at that time was virgin prairie versus cropland?
I would say almost half of it was virgin prairie, and a lot of it was low ground, which usually produced only hay. And over the years we tiled it, and now it's highly productive ground.
Yes, it certainly has become that way. So one of the kids wants to know what inspired you to go against the mainstream and pursue organic farming versus mainstream?
That goes way back to the 1940s. There was a fellow named Louis Bromfield who restored worn-out, eroded farms in Ohio, and I first was tuned into the idea of regenerative agriculture way back then. Another book that influenced me a lot was Fairfield Osborne's Our Plundered Planet, And I had that book. I gave it to Christine, who is into environmental science, and that book did a history of how once the North Africa, Carthage, and all of that area was the Garden of Eden, and now it's Sahara Desert because of the wrong farming methods.
So, but organic was really considered out of the mainstream back then.
Definitely, yes.
Was there a specific market for organic produce, or did you?
Not at first. It developed slowly. The realization that Roundup, for instance, contains carcinogenic compounds, and the idea of using that is kind of suicide in my view, and it's kind of a sacrilege, an insult to Holy Mother Earth. And right now, I think the religious leaders like Pope Francis and his Laudatum Si in 2015 made it clear that we are responsible to maintain Mother Earth's health, and one way to do that is to be smart enough to farm without these crutches that oftentimes enable farmers to be too large. They have more ground than they can really take care of without quick solutions.
That's very related to the next question, which is, what would you say your farming philosophy is? Anything besides what you've talked about?
Farming philosophy.
Yes.
Well, it follows a rotation that maintains fertility, and it calls for contours to prevent gullying, erosion. You look at all of our neighbors, they've got gullies that they can't cross with machinery. Look at our farm, everything is contoured, and grassy waterways, when they do wash out, they're repaired. And that happened in 1993 with our flood condition and tornadoes and everything else that came through. I was determined that I'd repair the damage and maintain grassy waterways and contours that help control excess moisture.
Oh, very good. So, how did you balance working as a professor, raising kids, trying to run an organic farm, which of course is highly labor intensive, and other sort of pulls in your life?
Well, I have to give credit to my spouse, Alice, for helping along, even though she wasn't wholeheartedly in favor of some of the things I was trying to do. So I had a lot of help. I can't claim to be a hero, a lone soldier.
So I remember, you were there, it seemed like early in the morning and late at night.
Yes, it was routine to go back to work after supper, and oftentimes we worked at night. We didn't have lights on our old John Deere tractor, but moonlight would provide enough. In 1974, we plowed into December, breaking up sod, and we were fortunate that flax was high priced, and the next year, 1974, we had a pretty good flax crop, and it bought up to $11 a bushel, which was highly unusual.
Did the farm make money from the get-go, or were there some lean years along the way?
Well, 76 was a dry year, and we got practically nothing except for snow accumulated by shelter belts. It was a very lean year. I remember that distinctly, that friends, the Connors over at Winfred, they came over to harvest the straw over west of us nothing, absolutely nothing grew that year because it was a total, absolute bust.
And then, of course, I remember in the 80s there was the farm crisis. How did that affect the farm?
In the 80s, I guess we survived somehow. I don't remember the 80s very well. It was like two jobs. I was trying to do the farm and the college, and I suppose I was a little deficient in both areas.
There you go. Okay, we're going to turn to sort of more broader topics around that. One of the kids wants to know, how has your approach to environmentalism impacted other areas of your life besides farming?
Besides farming, how has it impacted other areas? Well, what other areas? I wonder.
I don't know. Well, you certainly like to reuse everything.
Oh yes, yes. That is, all organic matter should be returned to the earth.
And nothing should be thrown away. Everybody should use everything to the max, right?
Well, I think nationally they say about 40% of our food is thrown away.
Yeah.
So, and it ends up in landfills where, it's total waste. It should be recycled, and that isn't being done.
All right, so here's another big one. What would your ideal food system look like? And we kind of talked about one of the shortcomings of our current food system being 40% waste of it.
The ideal food system should be on a smaller scale. There was a author, E.F. Schumacher, a German who lived in England, and he wrote a book, Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered. And I think that's the key. We think that the scale, there's efficiency in large scale. Well, there's also waste. And the biggest waste in that kind of monster machines is in human capital and human potential. It's so awesomely complex that you have to hire all your mechanical work done nowadays on these big machines.
There's certainly a growth in the local food movement and people growing more locally. Certainly that's been your philosophy.
Yes. Part of the distortion comes from farm programs that encourage bigness. The way the government funds in disaster insurance for farmers, so they can go out and do silly, unproductive things and still get paid. That's wrong.
Yeah. I remember over the years on the farm, you tried lots of different animals. What kind of animals did we have, and what did you enjoy sort of raising the most?
Well, we had sheep here at home, and neighbors' dogs got into them one year, and we even had a goat. We had some pigs one year, and they're called mortgage lifters. The hog business can be very productive. They produce a whole litter of pigs, and they're fairly frugal. They're economic. They'll eat about anything.
And I remember as a kid having calves and having to feed them the milk replacer in the mornings and.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we did one year bought 10 calves and raised them right here on the lake, and went on to sell heifers, and that was a fairly profitable business.
What did you love most being a farmer?
The fresh air, the exercise, I guess the good homegrown food, and the smells of alfalfa and clover growing, and the sight of the sunset and sometimes the sunrise were all bonus.
Yeah.
Didn't pay for any of it.
Yeah. How about what do you think the biggest challenges were of having the farm?
The biggest challenges were weeds, trying to control weeds, which oftentimes you don't have enough energy or a big enough crew to control the weeds. As we speak, we're going to hire Hispanic people to come in and clean up over 100 acres of soybeans. They routinely walk the corn earlier in the year, and this year I think we're going to have to surrender in our efforts to control weeds in the soybeans, and volunteer corn is coming also.
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge. So this is kind of asking you to look beyond, into the future. What do you hope will happen to the farm?
I hope it remains in the family somehow. I think the arrangement we have with organic renters is a viable option right now. I don't see anybody in our relationship wanting to actively farm and take responsibility for all the expenses of machinery and the inputs. I think right now we're at one of our optimum situations where the people, the brothers, the Johnson brothers, are very frugal and very caring for the land.
That's good. So this is kind of a question that one of the kids asked, which is sort of related to farming. What is the proper role of government in our lives?
The proper role of government is to stay out of our lives. The government is a safety net, but it too often is safety in favor of the wrong types of agriculture. So it's money, of course, that influences all of this. And right now, one of the practices is to go ahead and take risks and buy the government insurance, which the government pays most of the cost of the insurance, and then you win, no matter if you have a crop failure. That is counterproductive.
So when the kids come back to the farm and go out there, what do you hope that they learn or experience, or your grandkids or your great-grandkids, in the next generation?
Well, I think if you ask them, they have valued those hours that we spent, usually early in the morning before it gets too hot, working together, enhancing the growth of usually soybeans.
And of course, experiencing the things that you did, the sunrises and the sunsets and the smell of the alfalfa and
right,
all of those beautiful things. What would you like future generations to know about the farm?
That it's a gift from God, and as such it needs to be treated with utmost respect.
Anything else regarding the farm that you'd like to share?
Well, it's just something that everybody, in my experience, thinks that it is a sacred part of God's nature, and ought to be treated as such.
Thanks, Dad.